You are listening to the Mark Guzman Podcast Experience. Thank you for being on the podcast today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited for this episode. We have a lot to talk about, so we'll go ahead and start. The old adage is that we live in a bubble here in the Bay Area, with so many people leaning in the same direction, both politically and socially, that contrasts with much of the rest of the country. That can make it difficult to find and learn more about opposing viewpoints. My guest today decided to combat that with Uncharted, the Berkeley Festival of Ideas. She has also spent considerable amount of time in the publishing business, working with noted publishing companies HarperCollins before starting her own publishing company called Red Pencil Public Relations and Marketing. So please join me in welcoming my guest, Helena Brantly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's get started. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? And are you originally from the Bay Area?
No. I'm from New Jersey. I was born and raised in northern New Jersey, Fort Lee, New Jersey. I lived in Princeton, New Jersey, and I also lived in Paterson, New Jersey. So I'm a Jersey girl through and through.
Okay. When did you move to the Bay Area?
So I moved to the Bay Area in 2006, and at that time I was living in Washington, D.C., and I had been for 7 years. I worked for a small nonprofit that the executive director, his name was Jim Wallace, wrote a book called God's Politics. And in the process of working on that book with HarperCollins, who was his publisher, they said at the end of that, hey, we have this position in San Francisco. Would you be interested in moving to San Francisco? And I was like, yes. And my husband was like, what? So it took a little while, and because we had just gotten married, and he was in had a great position at the bank that he was working in, and his mom and his brother were close by in Columbia, Maryland, and so he felt it was not as easy a decision for him as it was for me, but ultimately we talked about it. We said we'd give it 2 years. We said, we're East Coast people. We're probably going to hate it out there in the Bay Area. Let's just try it. That was 2006, and we've been here ever since.
Now, do you hate it?
Oh my gosh. We got here. We love it. And here's the thing. I had actually worked before I got into publishing and before I got into working in the nonprofit space, I had worked at corporate agencies in New York and Washington, D.C. And one of the jobs I had was based, I worked in San Francisco proper for PG&E was the client. So I would come to San Francisco once a month for about 3 or 4 months. So I had some idea of San Francisco proper. But to be honest, I didn't know if I was going to like living here. Within weeks, we both were like, oh my gosh, this is great. It was the quality of life. It was, something I've heard a lot, which is that people here in the Bay Area work hard, but they play hard too, which was sort of different from what we had experienced as East Coaster, where you just go, work. So we love it. We love it here. And this is home.
Now, do you live in San Francisco, South Bay, North Bay?
No, and that's what's funny. Everybody thought, you guys are young. You're going to want to live in San Francisco proper. You don't have kids yet. Well, we came to San Francisco, and honestly, we did not love it. It was too cold. There were very few people of color. And my husband's friend said, you should check out Lake Merritt. You should check out Oakland. And we came to Oakland. I still remember so Harper had sent us here for a week to find a place and to kind of get acclimated before the big move. And I still remember driving across the Bay Bridge with Todd, and it was pouring rain. Almost the whole time we were here, it was pouring rain. Anyway, we got to Lake Merritt, and I was like, it's green. There are black and brown people here. We like it here. So that's how we ended up here in Oakland, and specifically at Lake Merritt. We loved it.
Okay. So let's do a quick rundown of your career.
Okay.
Now, you started with a company called, see if I pronounce this, Sojourners. So
Well, so Sojourners and Call to Renewal was the nonprofit that I worked for, but I actually started at a company called Rubenstein Associates
okay.
in New York City. If you work in publicity and you work with celebrities, then chances are you've heard of Rubenstein Associates, because Howard Rubenstein is known as Mr. Fix-It. So he used to be, and I think to a certain extent still is, the guy that you call when you're a celebrity or a person of fame, you have a lot of money, and you've done something wrong.
So he's
So
the Ray Donovan. Have you seen that TV show?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen that. No,
So
what is that?
it's on Showtime.
Okay.
This guy Ray Donovan works for a law firm, and basically when celebrities really mess up, they call onto this law firm, and he's the guy who
Yeah.
doesn't fix it.
Yeah. But what's interesting about Howard Rubenstein is that the way he would fix it would be, it's basically was crisis management. So he would be consulted if, a person of notoriety did a bad thing. He would come in. What was helpful about knowing someone who could call up, reporters and producers is that, they try to fix what the problem was, and to consult the people that are most likely to have interest in hearing the story and hopefully helping to, with resolution. So I can remember now. In fairness, that's and there have been like New Yorker profiles of Howard Rubenstein for people who are interested. What's interesting about him is that he also had this incredible team of people that would come in and help celebrities sort of figure out the next step. So I know he worked with the Princess Fergie, Princess of York, I think was her title, when she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do. And I think Rubenstein was helpful in the marriage between Fergie and, what was it? It was Weight Watchers. Donald Trump, Eartha Kitt, I'm trying to think of some of the other celebrities, would come in, and I was like a little secretary. I was not sitting in these meetings. I was literally the person like bringing coffee and like typing up the notes. But I can remember when JFK Jr. came, when he was about to launch George magazine. You may remember he had a political magazine that did not do well. But in the beginning stages, there were meetings where, and I remember all the like us public secretaries, essentially men and women, we'd be like, psst, psst, did you see JFK's here? Eartha Kitt's here?
I would imagine it'd be pretty neat to see all these
it was very
popular
very
celebrities
cool.
walk through.
It was very, very cool. And so that's why, we always were dressed, and it was a fun place to work. It was a very hard place to work too, because it was a very, I've often said that what to me felt unique about working at a place like Rubenstein Associates was the majority of the people that I worked with, and the majority of the people that were there, like senior people, were former reporters, former producers, like journalism professors or graduates. So this wasn't, sometimes I think about like, the way we think about crisis management today, and it's, it doesn't feel as substantive as, what I feel like was happening at a place like Rubenstein, where you were really thinking carefully about mostly telling the truth, figuring out, what are the news outlets that are going to be, interested in hearing your side of the story. And there was just a lot of really smart strategic counsel happening. And I loved it. I loved it so much. That was a really great place, but it was also a grind. You saw a lot of people come and go because it was not an easy place to work.
And what year was this?
This was 1996.
Okay. Do you remember what Trump hired them for?
No, but it was something to do with the casinos, and we were always kind of snooping around, but they were, unless you worked on that specifically, you didn't.
They kept
know.
it very
it was very
private.
That was the other thing. It was a very professionally run place. It was, you had a lot of VIP people coming in, political, media, sports, movies, And there was a certain decorum that everybody was expected to have. And yeah, it was a really great place to be like young in New York City and, just starting out in my career. And yeah, it's great. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And then from there, you went to nonprofit.
So I worked for Rubenstein for like a year and some change. And then I worked for a company called DeVries PR, which had a part of a Procter and Gamble business, which was Oil of Olay. That was marketing. That was publicity, and I hated it, to be perfectly honest. I have since learned that it was a good place to learn again the fundamentals of publicity, but I really don't care about skincare. I mean, it was just not something that we were literally promoting.
Skincare products.
Yes, and I was just like, I do not care about this stuff. But when you work on a Procter and Gamble brand, you learn a lot. And I had an opportunity to go to Procter and Gamble in Cincinnati, and to some of the smartest people I've ever met, I met there. So great for learning the fundamentals, learning, tactics and strategy and metrics and that type of thing. Not great because at the end of the day, alpha hydroxy products and skincare, not so interested in that kind of thing. It was like a mild form of torture, actually. But it's also great to learn how big brands use their money to market. And I learned a lot about that there. So then I moved from New York City. I moved to Washington, D.C., and I worked for a marketing and advertising agency that has since been bought by WPP. And that was my foray into marketing and advertising. Also loved it. I was on the customer side, or the account side. So my job was basically to be the liaison between what the client wanted and the creative team. Loved it. Because you get the best of both worlds, sitting in the meetings, trying to understand, okay, what is the client saying that they want to do? And then having the role of then creating documents that creative people, creative directors, copywriters, designers, that they can then take and do the thing. And that was, I loved it. It was great. And that's actually how I came to San Francisco to work on the PG&E business. Long story short, it was 3 different agencies that were working on PG&E at the time. This was right before Erin Brockovich scandal broke.
Okay.
So it was advertising, marketing, and public relations. And so that was an interesting experience. So then I left, I left there and I worked for the Caraway Group, which was a small DC marketing, advertising, some publicity work, and worked for a little bit on the Microsoft business, was doing a lot of flying from DC to Redmond. Somewhere along the way, I developed a fear of flying, which is crazy because I lived in England for a year. I spent my junior year of college abroad and I had done a lot of traveling. But somewhere along the way, I just developed this fear of flying. And so these long flights were becoming harder and harder. I also met at the time the guy I was dating, who is now my husband. And I was just sort of feeling like, you know what? I don't want to work this hard. It feels too much. I'm not loving the projects that I'm working on. I'm learning. I was always learning, but I need to do something where I feel like I'm adding some real value to the world. And that's how I fell into working for Call to Renewal and Sojourners.
Okay. And then what year did you start Red Pencil?
I started Red Pencil in 2011.
Okay. So you're already into it 6 years.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Red Pencil
Sure.
and what you do there.
So I founded Red Pencil, I think it's worth saying, when my job at Nolo Press, which is where I worked for a year and a half as the marketing and publicity director, when that job went away because of a layoff. And I think it's important to start there because I'm not so sure that I ever would have worked on my own had I not basically, there were other choices, but had I not taken a time out, 2 weeks really, to say, what do I really want to do? I mean, I was heartbroken. I was, worried about when I lost my job. But what I also was able to do in the 2 weeks that I took reading this book that kind of really changed the way I think about things was to realize that I loved publishing. I loved working with writers and authors. I mean, my job at Harper was like incredible. It was, again, hard work, long hours, but some of the best work that I had done in my career up until that point had been at Harper, working with authors and with the marketing team, with the other publicists, I just loved it. The editors, my favorite parts of working at HarperCollins was working with the editors and talking to the editors, and love that. Like how sitting in what was called pub board meetings, where people, the editors would basically say, "Hey, we want to buy this book," and having to present that to the house and hearing what marketing has to say and hearing what publicity has to say, and that to me, it was like electric to me. I love that. So what's important is that there was a period of discernment where I said, okay, so remember, like 2011, we're still in the world is falling apart, in the middle of the Great Recession.
Yeah, we're at the bottom.
Yeah, and I knew that I was not going to be able to take my salary here in the Bay Area and work in publishing. I mean, Harper was kind of the big game. If I wanted to stay in sort of traditional publicity or book publishing, then everybody was saying, well, you're going to need to go to New York. I'm like, no, been there, done that, not going back there. So I was able to have this period of discernment and say, I love media. More than anything, I love news, and I loved the challenge of trying to figure out how to take what people were writing about and fit that into the cycle, what's happening in the news. So, sorry, what was your question?
So going into Red Pencil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did that? Well, let's start with the name. How did the name?
Oh yeah, that to me is a fun thing to talk about. So my mom was a secretary. She grew up when I was growing up. She was a secretary, and she used to take out these. Actually, they were red pens, and edit my thank you notes in a way that was part traumatic.
Was she a teacher?
No, she was a secretary and, like an executive assistant. So, very disciplined, had a very specific way of doing things, wanted things done right and precise. I'm a Montessori kid, so I was always sort of like, I had a hard time with that. And so, but I think of her as my first editor because she was trying to get me, even, at 7, 8, 9 years old, like I'm doing now with my own girls, to sit down, think about what do I want to say, and to say it well, and to say it, with proper grammar. So when I was thinking about, okay, how do I want to like brand the work that I'm going to be doing, I immediately thought about red ink. And then my husband, who's in finance, said, no, you cannot name a company Red Ink. That you can't do that. And we went back and forth. I'm like, well, why not? I have a whole reason to explain it. So I came up with Red Pencil because she would she would use red pens. And I do think that there were times when she would use red pencils as well. We had pencils around the house a lot. But that was my thinking is like, she, in many ways, what I try to do in my work is to be clear and concise and to kind of communicate what people are writing about in the best way that I can. I don't always get it right.
So she gave you the foundation to the mindset of what you do today.
Absolutely. And in more ways than one. So, yeah.
Now, how many people are currently working at Red Pencil?
So my model is not agency based, which is what I come out of and I know well. So my model is I love what I do. I want to be involved in the day-to-day. So rather than, I think the traditional model, which is, you have a business and you grow it and then, I would become the person that's chiefly responsible for bringing in the business and passing it on to like an account person. That did not interest me. So
is that how an agency typically works?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you have agency teams essentially. You usually have an account supervisor and an account executive and an account assistant. And, this is where it can be pricey because you're paying for, all of these people on a team. I really love the idea of being so deeply involved in every project. So I work with subcontractors and I bring in subcontractors to help me with marketing, with advertising, with copywriting, editing, researching. So right now I'm working with, I have a woman named Phyllis who's been working with me. She does a lot of the editing. We do a lot of strategic work together where we just sort of, she has like 50 plus years of experience in PR and marketing. And so a lot of it is strategic counsel where we're bouncing ideas. She does a lot of the writing, a lot of the editing, I should say. I mean, I do the majority of the initial drafting of things, but like most people, I need a good editor. Not naturally great. If you see my Facebook and Instagram posts, they tend to go on for a while. But so that's my model. I mean, I bring in subcontractors, and so I'm constantly meeting people and evaluating and saying, I look for people who do social media engagement well. I'm less interested in people who sort of brand themselves as social media experts. I'm more interested in how do you engage and looking at that.
There's a lot of social media experts
I
these
know,
days.
and I have to say, God bless them. I get it. I get that there's the perception that one can be like an expert at this thing that's like 5 minutes old. But I think that what I believe is that learning how and watching how people engage is one of the best ways. It's not the only way, but it's one of the best ways to kind of see how people do it well and to learn from them. So I'm interested in people who understand the mechanics of how things like Facebook work, because I feel like you need like a PhD to understand exactly how that thing works, if you're trying to use it as a marketing tool. And I'm interested in people who have comfort level in Instagram. How do you use Boomerang and different things like that. But I think we're all learning, and I'm certainly in that. And so I don't. I'm just interested in working with people who have a proficiency and an interest in doing things in a way that resonates with the way I do things. Because that's the other thing, you learn when you run a business that you hire not only for skill, but you hire for fit. And that's an important part of how I, look for people that I work with. So yeah.
Now, who are your clients these days?
So I'm primarily hired by publishers, large publishers and small publishers, medium-sized publishers. And then sometimes I'm hired directly by authors. So an author could say, for example, I have a publisher, they have a PR team, but my PR person, has like 12 other books that they're working on, and I'm just worried that my book isn't going to get as much attention as it deserves. So then the way I really like to work is with the author, but also loop in the publisher. So, we're working as a team, even though I'm, outside of their internal processes. But because I come from Harper, because I understand the way many publishers think, I think it can be helpful for them to know what I'm doing and for me to know what they're doing, and for us to figure out together with the author, where's the synergy, and, how can we do things, well, as a team.
Now, do you work with authors that also do self-publishing and promote their book
Yeah.
their way?
So here's my thing. I have worked with self-published authors. That does not tend to be the best field for me to play in, because my background is regional and national media. And, like it or not, it's still very difficult for most published authors to be recognized, to engage with traditional media. So that's still hard. And so I like news. And so I like to be able to fit something into the news cycle, print media, online, TV. And if I can't do that, right out the bat, then the chances are it's not for me. But, I've also learned not to say never, because there are something came across my desk recently, and I thought, wow, this doesn't look like a published book. And what this person is writing about feels very real and relevant, and they have, background and experience. And so I thought, there might be a way here. I did also this year work on a book that was an ebook, an Amazon ebook. Really, really hard. We did get some, decent media. But what I have suggested to people who self-publish their books is to think more in terms of hiring a marketer and not a publicist. A publicist is primarily, focused on media, primarily. And I think that self-published authors need to think about their books as they are more like products. And so I think it's, thinking about paid advertising and events and that type of thing. So, and that doesn't tend to be where I want to focus most of my time right now anyway.
Well, that's a good piece of advice for someone that's listening and possibly thinking of self-publishing.
Yeah.
Now, do you work only with books, or
So,
are there
yeah.
other products and avenues you work with?
Well, so that's the thing. I'm at a point now, almost 7 years in, where I really feel like the business is changing and evolving to reflect what's happening in the world. So 3 years ago, I was invited by the Bay Area Book Festival to basically help them be their festival publicist to get the organization off the ground, and that was incredible. They're folks that you all might be interested in having on the show. So that was great because it was new, and I was being a publicist, but I was promoting, a book festival, which was incredible. So I did that for 2 years, and then that actually led to Uncharted, the Berkeley Festival of Ideas, which was this year, it's 5th year. And so for 2 years, I was the publicist. And this year, I was the co-curator with Lance Noble, which was the most incredible, fun experience. I just can't say enough things about how wonderful that was for me, both personally and professionally.
So let's talk about Uncharted.
Yes.
So you said
Happily.
this is the 5th year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did this idea and how did this goal get started? Because Uncharted is really the Berkeley Festival of Ideas.
Right. So all credit goes to Lance Noble, who is the founder of this 2D Ideas Festival. He is also a co-founder of Berkeley Side, which if you live in or near Berkeley and you're not following Berkeley Side, you, I think, ought to. So it's an online newspaper, basically. And so 5 years ago, he said, this is the Bay Area, and we don't have an ideas festival in the way that Aspen does, or South by Southwest, or New Yorker Festival. We should have one. So he started one. And that's kind of like, I just love it. It's like, we should have it. Let's do it. So for the first 4 years, so let me say what it is. It's a 2-day love fest for people who like to think. That's really, whatever it is, I think, that you care about, whether it's immigration, politics, gender, race, economics, science, business, chances are there's something there for you. And so what it is, and what's unique about Uncharted, and we use the hashtag Berkeley Ideas, which we're across, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, you can find us, is that there are a lot of festivals and there are a lot of conferences that people can go to where you will hear 3 or 4 people on a panel. This is not that. This is designed to have 2 people on a stage talking about some of the key issues of our day.
Now, are they debating?
No, it's a conversation. And that's what's important. Now, I had a conversation with a guy named Michael Denzel Smith, who wrote this book called Invisible Man, got the whole world watching, A Black Man's Education. New York Times bestseller. He was on with Trevor Noah. He's been in the New York Times profiled. Read his book, loved so much of it. Didn't agree with everything. So we sat and we talked about some of the things we agreed with and some of the things I didn't agree with. But it was meant to be a way that, we can say 2 things can be true. Think your book was great, a lot of great things, but let's talk about this, where I don't necessarily agree. He has a huge criticism of President Obama. Some of it is founded, but much of it I didn't agree with. So we talked a little bit about that. So to answer your question, it's really not meant to debate. I feel like debate, if you look at the history and the roots of what debate used to be, it wasn't what it is today, where people kind of lose their minds and there's no civility in the discussion. It's all about,
Extremes.
Yeah, that's not what this is. This is meant to say 2 things or more can be true. Let's just talk about, that. So That's why I feel Uncharted is different. That's one of the reasons I feel that it's different. You're also gonna have the best food ever. I mean, honestly, when you show up and you see, there's a woman named Wendy who is responsible for that. She works with these incredible people. We had this, I forget the name of the bakery, the Berkeley-based bakery that they came and they had this incredible food, and teas and coffees and snacks in the middle. So that's a big thing, and we could talk about food for ages, but that's another thing that feels different. It's a highly curated experience. So the people that we're bringing to have the conversations, some of the people you may have heard of, but most of the people you probably haven't. And this year we had conversations about race. We had a fantastic conversation about class cluelessness by a woman named Joan C. Williams, who was in conversation with a guy named Peter Layden. And that was talking about the white working class. Fascinating. There was another conversation about Dr. Cesar Cruz and Dr. Prudence Carter. Dr. Prudence Carter is the dean of the education school at Berkeley. And Dr. Cruz recently returned to the Bay Area from Harvard, where he got his PhD in education. And they talked about inequity in education in a way that you're not going to find at most festivals. You're just not going to find that. We also had a woman, probably one of my favorite conversations was a woman named Heather Bushey out of Washington, D.C. She's an economist. And she came and she talked about inequities in the ways in which we think about labor in this country. And it was, God, I'm not doing justice to a conversation where she helped people, especially working families, understand that all the ways that we feel like things are not working, this is not something that's made up. And she had this wonderful data to show that there are ways that, the way we think about labor in this country could be different and work better for families. And so she's this incredibly smart person who managed to talk about a subject like economy and labor statistics and standards and issues in a way that was like just melted me. She has a book called After Piketty, and it's like a tome. She and Brad DeLong, I think, wrote it together, and I was like, oh my God, I'm just buying this because I loved what she had to say. And so we also had a conversation about end of life. There's a woman here you all might be interested, Jessica Zitter. She's a ER physician and a palliative care physician at Highland Hospital, talking about how do we think about death and dying, and how do we prepare for that, and how do we work with physicians when we have loved ones who are dying and we're scared. And it was a really beautiful, I think, rich conversation about death. It was like 9 a.m. on Friday, which is like so I think there were we had, I think, about 20 conversations over the course of 2 days. And
So it's a festival to really explore ideas, other people's perspectives, and expand your mind.
exactly. And Lance and I often said, look, if you come out of there and you like loved everything, then chances are we didn't totally do our job, because we want to introduce you to things where you might say, I don't know, like there were like, one of the most moving, there was a guy named Ronald Rael, who's a professor of architecture, I think at Berkeley. I can't, how you have experiences where you can't fully articulate them because you just feel them in your bones?
Yeah.
He reimagined the conversation about the border wall in a way that I can't even do justice to it. Like, I have to send you the link. You have to see for yourself. Basically, he showed and told us about the humanity on both sides of the border. It was incredible. Like, I'm still, like, it's been a month and I'm still processing how incredible what he did was, because he managed to take such a polarizing subject and to reduce it to, how do we think about the human people here? And I mean, I could just cry about it. It was incredible. So that's what I mean, if you're a person who enjoys reading, talking, debating, thinking, um, wrestling with ideas big and small, you need to come to Uncharted. I mean, that's period.
When's the next Uncharted?
It's next October.
Okay.
And it's funny because I will be happy to share information, and I really think you guys should talk to Lance, because this was his baby, and what a joy for me to have the opportunity to work with him, to say, okay, the programs have been great for 4 years. How can we make them even better? And in all the ways that you think of things being great, inclusive, interesting, relevant. Um, and so, yeah, and so I'm excited. I'm jazzed about next year already.
So it's a 2-day event,
Yeah,
correct?
2 days.
And
Fridays and Saturdays.
where's it held in Berkeley?
That's the cool thing. So it's at the Freight and Salvage and the Berkeley Rep. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to sit in a comfortable, cool space and just let your mind go. So yeah, it's the Berkeley Rep, and right across the street. You literally half the day is in one place, and then you cross the street, and we're half the day in the other. So we start out at the Berkeley Rep, and then we cross the street and we come over to the Freight and Salvage. And we have lunch. We had Town Kitchen, I think, is who brought in lunch for us. Gives people an opportunity to sit and talk. Because here's the thing: like when you're feasting, which is really what it is, on ideas, I think most of us, even the introverts among us, which I am, you kind of want to talk. Like you want to be, hey, did you see so and so? What did you think about? And that's where the community comes from, right? So you're sitting there and you're having this experience, but then you want to engage, you want to talk, you want to wrestle, you want to debate, you want to question. And so we had about over 300 people this year, and
It sounds like it's a
fun.
very friendly environment where you can actually exchange ideas.
Yes, and can I just tell you, one of the best pieces that I saw after the festival, Leah Garchek, who's a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, she did a little blurb about us because she came on Friday, and she said something funny that was kind of like, she's like, there was all this good energy right beforehand. It was sort of like, she said something like, it was like all of the overachievers in class, like meeting beforehand or something like that. She had this great way of describing it, but the energy there is good. And that doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree. Who wants to be in a place where everybody thinks the same thing? I mean, I certainly don't. And so that's the beauty of it. Yeah, you have people who, may share your opinion on a particular thing, or they may not. So yeah.
Now, do you feel, especially growing up in New Jersey, living
Mhm.
in Washington, D.C., and then coming out to San Francisco and the Bay Area, do you feel the Bay Area is a bubble within a bubble within a bubble as far as ideas, especially Berkeley having
Yeah,
the 60s and the whole movement really
free
coming out
speech.
of
Yeah,
Berkeley? Yeah.
absolutely. Here's my thinking on that. I believe there's more diversity of opinion and thought in the Bay Area than we believe. I think that it's sort of like it can be hard when you're in a place like this, which is generally, yes, progressive, open-minded. I personally don't like the word liberal, but yes, there are a lot of liberal thought. There's a lot of liberal thought here. But I'll be honest, when you talk to people, and I talk to a lot of people. I mean, I'm as you can probably figure out, I like to talk. And so I meet people in the grocery store. I drop my kids off, and I'm talking to the grandparents, and I'm a talker, right? When you get people, I think, to feel that it's okay to say, you know what, that conservative person said something that resonates with me, or that religious person says something that I grew up hearing. There is more diversity of opinion and thought. And I believe there are Republicans in Berkeley. I believe there are Republicans in Oakland. I myself am a registered independent. So I feel like, sometimes I meet us places and I'm like, oh, it's nice to meet, a registered independent. Which, by the way, my husband has a really hard time with that as a Democrat. But the places that I find myself meeting people, talking to people, there's more diversity than we like to think. And I think, yes, by and large, I think there's a sort of a bubble, But when you get up close and start talking to people who feel like, again, the space is safe, there's a lot more richness, I think, than diversity of thought and opinion than I think most of us are willing to acknowledge or that we even know, because we tend to cluster around people, you know, where we all like a lot of the same things, but oftentimes the conversations are really trite. They don't get down to the nitty gritty, where that's where you can find and discover, oh, you think like that too? Oh, you like George Will too? Oh, really? He says, so yeah, I mean, I think broadly speaking, yes, I think we are in a bubble, but there's more richness here than I think we're.
So maybe it's a different type of bubble. Maybe people perceive it as a liberal bubble when it's really a bubble of diverse ideas, and it just appears that way.
Well, I think people are afraid to share their diverse ideas sometimes. So that's where I think the area gets painted with a swath of, oh, they're just liberals. But the reality is the majority of the people that I know in the Bay Area are not from the Bay Area. So they're coming here from the middle of the country. They're coming here from the East Coast. They're coming here from outside of the country. So, and I think sometimes when we get here, we sort of feel like we have to swallow some of the things that maybe we grew up with or we thought. But once you start talking to folks, you realize, like, oh, wow, I'm surprised that you said that. And I certainly know people are surprised when I say things. I'm come from a pretty traditional family, a pretty conservative, religious family in a lot of ways. But I also grew up outside of New York City. So, there's a lot of contradictions sometimes in my own experiences. I lived in the UK for a year. So that definitely colors some of the ways I think about things. So, yeah.
How important is it to you that people get exposed to contrasting viewpoints?
Extremely important. Extremely important, because and I say this as a 43 almost year old person in the world in this time where things are so polarized. But I say that also as a parent. And I think that the biggest challenge for me right now is being the person that I'm asking my kids to be. And that means, tolerating differences in how people think about a great many things. That doesn't mean that I have to agree with them. And that's part of the things that I teach my girls. You don't have to agree with them, but I do feel, someone said something recently, where did I hear it about that? Oh, it was Chimamanda talking to with Ta-Nehisi Coates and I think it's Jeffrey Goldberg, the head of The Atlantic, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. And they were talking about, it's such a great podcast. Listen, you should listen. It's called The Interview. But they, sorry, what was the question again? How important are ideas?
As far as contrasting viewpoints, like how important is it to people to really expose themselves?
Yeah. I love this interview because they were talking about this. I mean, more broadly, but they were talking about this. And I think that the key to peace in the world, however close we will get to that, will be this, the idea of, here's where I was going with that. Chimamanda said that, oh God, I lost it. Sorry. Sorry. This happens a lot. Democracy is fragile. And I think we are feeling that, right? And to me, how we get to a place of peace on earth, again, however close we can get to that, will depend on our willingness to feel and own what it is we believe confidently, but create the space that says, you know what, let me hear what you have to say. I mean, over the last year, I've been participating in a series of conversations online, closed Facebook group with Spaceship Media has arranged these conversations for women from the Bay Area and women from the Bay Area that voted for Hillary Clinton, as I did, and women from Alabama, all white, who voted for Donald Trump. And the great test, I think, for all of us has been, how do we allow for sharing what we believe, but creating space to learn what it is you believe? And so for a year now, we've had some of the most difficult conversations, these women. We've never met. It's all been online. And I feel like that experience has been so important. You know, you talked about the bubble. You asked about the bubble. For me, to broaden my circle of friends, they happen to be online, and to learn about, what some of these women think. And I'll be honest, there are some things where we are never going to agree, ever. But there are also things where we do agree, or that we're willing to just talk through it. We had a really difficult conversation about Roy Moore over the weekend, where there was this ardent defense by one of the women. That's the way I perceived it. And I remember wrestling with myself, because I can always find a common ground. I can always see something in what you're saying where I can say, okay, I see that. But also, I felt she needed to understand on this issue of, sexual misconduct with a minor. No, there's another way to look at that. And so I feel like she said her piece, I said my piece. It was not important for me to necessarily change her opinion, but it was important for me to be very clear in what I feel and what I believe, and to say that in a way that maybe something that I said will resonate with her. Maybe it won't. But these conversations have been so rich and so important and so hard and difficult. I wrote an op-ed, a short one, about how important it was, but also how hard it was. And so to your question about how important, it's very, very important.
So you said something interesting there, that you were not trying to change her viewpoint in things. And I think many people, when they get into debates or arguments or exchanging ideas, they go in thinking, I'm right. I'm going to change that person's perspective. And if they don't, they're a bad person.
Right.
And I think it's completely different when you go in with a different mentality where, hey, I'm going to explain what I believe, why I believe it is. You have the right to believe what you believe. I will take it in, and then maybe we can develop this into a different idea or progress both of our ideas, or it is what it is.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly right. And that sometimes I think words like right and wrong, we just almost need to throw them out, because
it's very subjective.
Yeah, I mean, and so you're right. Like if you, but it's the same thing, when we're discussing, an issue, or when I meet somebody on the street and I think, okay, this person is telling me that they view the world differently. My job is not to make them think like me. And I'll be honest with you that I think that one of the things that helped me understand that was traveling, being abroad, and seeing. I mean, I definitely came back more patriotic than I ever thought possible. But living with that discomfort of saying, well, like you said, we may find a place where we meet on this road, or we may just get to the point where, you know what, that's a position where you're not going to move in, and that's a position where I'm not, and that's okay. And we've had that over this past year, where some things like, okay, just not going to get there.
Yeah, I think many people need to remember that everyone is in life figuring out their own journey, and
Absolutely,
they may not be ready to take in a certain idea, and they might in another year or two.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and now traveling abroad too is very interesting. I've done my fair share of traveling, and I have to totally agree with you. And the one thing that I take back, the fact that you said you come back more patriotic is 100% true. I was recently in Portugal earlier this year, and my girlfriend and I were down there 2 weeks, and for a few days we spent time with this family, highly educated family. I mean, we're talking about professors, scientists, deans of colleges. I mean, highly educated family, and they knew everything about U.S.
Yes.
politics, and it really, like, I had to take a step back
Mm-hmm.
because I was shocked as to how much they knew about our own political system. Now, the one thing that really hit home with me is one of them said, look, yes, you guys in America have your problems, you know, but the one thing is you don't understand how people outside of your country in the world
Right.
respect you, because no matter what problems you have, you always come up with a solution and you guys always fix it.
Yep.
And look at all your problems you've had in the past. You know, people criticize you, but you fix it
Yeah.
and then you guys move forward. And that's why, to many people outside of the US is still extremely strong, not from an economic point of view, even though we are
Mm-hmm.
still,
Mm-hmm.
but the idea, you know, just I guess people have a certain mindset of what America is.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to live here and even understand that until you travel abroad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm always amazed by how much people outside of the US know about US politics and what's happening in this country. How long were you in Portugal?
2 weeks, 2 weeks in March. And one night for dinner, we sat down with one of the gentlemen. He turned on the news, and all they were talking about was U.S. politics.
Wow. Were you in Lisbon or?
Yeah, we started in Lisbon, but we went up to Porto, and we stayed in a town called Coimbra,
Huh.
which is maybe 2 hours, no, maybe an hour and a half south of Porto.
Hmm. How cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, to meet completely random people
Yeah.
in a different country, find out about their lives and how similar
Mm-hmm.
they are to us.
Yeah.
I mean, running marathons, having
Yep.
kids, dealing with the same educational problems, dealing with, oh, we want to live in this neighborhood because the schools are better.
Right.
Exact same thing. So
Yes.
there's so many common traits between us and everyone else in the world. But then when you start talking about politics in the various different countries and how we operate, yeah, I left that conversation much prouder as an American,
Mm.
just because of the way they look at us. And they're like, yeah, you know, we make jokes about Trump presidency and all this stuff, but you guys are going to figure this out. And after everything, regardless of what your view is, you're going to come out better.
I believe that. I really do. I mean, I think, joke about being a cockeyed optimist, but I think our history would suggest that we will get through this. And I was thinking this morning that had how do I want to say this? I look at things like the conversations with the women from Alabama. I look at some of the conversations I'm having with my friends. I'm looking at the books that my friends and I are reading and talking about. I look at some of the conversations my husband and I are having. And I think that how you think about things like a Trump presidency, I think how you think about what do you do as a result of that is important. And I think, in my opinion, far too much time is spent on, how did we get here? I mean, I do think it's important to look at how we got here, but I think it's more important, in my opinion, to look at where are we going, what are we learning in this moment, because there's a whole lot to learn if we're open to that. And I don't just mean politically. I mean in our daily lives, how we're engaging with people, what we're learning from people. There's a lot of conversation about the working class. I wish it would be broader to include working class, not just the white working class, but the working class, broadly speaking. There's a lot to learn. So I feel optimistic, and I love that you were able to travel and to go and I also love hearing that family could look at what's happening here in this country and say, yeah, you got some things you're going to need to work through, but if history is any indication, you guys are going to work through that. You're going to be okay. And I definitely feel that. I do. I mean, I feel that genuinely, but I also feel it it's important to share that as a parent. I mean, I just keep coming back to my most important job right now and my hardest job. Let me tell you, marriage and family, these are hard things now. They're always hard, I feel like, in some regard. But when we're dealing with all of the stresses of fear based on what's happening, with the decisions that are being made out of Washington, I read a lot of Buddhism. And one of the things that I come to again and again when I'm tempted to be overwhelmed by what's happening out in the world, where I have very little control really, is something that the Buddhists talk about for all the people who want to create change out in the world, but whose interior and home lives are run amok. Good luck, because you're actually creating more chaos if your home life isn't, if the people that you live with, if there isn't peace there, then you're creating more chaos in the world. And that's that is easy to not deal with, but very, very true. And so I think a lot about the three people that I live with, and trying my best. And trust me when I tell you, I do not always get this right. But trying to create peace there for them, and happiness there, and contentment, and love and kindness and gentleness.
And being a parent nowadays is, I think today and moving forward is going to get tougher and tougher, because the world is changing so fast.
Absolutely.
On a yearly basis. I mean, if you just look at the rate of technology and the fact that the iPhone that really changed so much of the world, and just the development of smartphones only came out 10 years ago.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, there was a Google exec that said that the smartphone, one of the most advanced pieces of technology today, is going to be the slowest, clunkiest, dumbest device your 4-year-old today will ever experience. So that puts it into perspective. And so raising children is extremely tough, because how can you even imagine what the world will be like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road?
Right.
And here's what your children will have to experience. So it really comes down to teaching a lot of the fundamental values that they
That's
can take
right.
on and use in any
That's
world,
right.
really.
That's what I believe. I mean, I don't know, what the future holds in terms of automation, but I can tell you that one of the things I've been thinking about that Joan C. Williams said at Uncharted was, I mean, and again, the conversation was about the white working class largely. She said that if we were, I'm paraphrasing, if we were afraid by what globalization would mean and has meant in many ways, what automation is going to mean for, in particular, the working class, that's something to really be focused on. And I'm thinking a lot about that, because while I was born into the working class and have moved out of the working class, and my father had multiple degrees, but we were still working class people in terms of how we were living. Her point was, we need to care about what happens to working class people, whether we're in the working class or not. Because the reality is, most of us, if we're out of it, we have family and friends and people we love and care about who are. And I think she has a book. I haven't her book sold out. I was happy to hear that Uncharted. But where I keep coming back to, and I think this reflects, I think, in part of what you were saying, is it has to be more about caring about just ourselves and what's happening in our own immediate lives. As much as it's important, as I said, to think about and care for the people that we live with, I do think that, when I leave this earth, I hope that something that I have done will reflect a care for people other than the people I live with. You know what I mean? Like, And so I think about these things as I move about my day. Um, how do I continue to, um, yeah, think about more than just me and more than just the people that are in my immediate vicinity. And so I think about the communities that I come from. And I'm a person of color, so I think about the disproportionate ways in which we exist in this country. And so my heart is always thinking about people who look like me, that I don't necessarily know. And when I say people of color, I do mean broadly defined, black and brown, red, yellow. Yeah.
Yeah. So, red pencil.
Yeah.
Where do you see the future? Where's this? Where are you trying to take this company?
Oh, it's a good question, Mark. What I want to continue to do is to work with writers and thinkers who have important things that they're saying and doing. I primarily work with media, so I want to continue. I'm going to need to be a little bit more selective, I think, about the projects that I take, the books specifically that I take, because the media environment is just so, it's unlike anything I've seen, in my 20 plus years as a publicist, in terms of, media trying to react to, at any given minute, what's coming out of DC. But also, I think, the media industry is, there's a lot of change happening there with newspapers shaking out, and, there's a lot of change happening there. So I have to acknowledge that, as good as I think I might be as a publicist, the opportunities are limited in terms of, the way they were 10 years ago, where, you could do a fresh air interview, you could do a New York Times, review, New York Times book review, and maybe one other piece, and you can get some traction. It's a lot harder now to see books moving, selling books. Not just, sometimes you get great coverage and that doesn't even translate into sales. So I want to continue to work with people. I love promoting people whose work I believe in. I love that, and I want to continue to do that. And I think it's sort of open in terms of how I do that. Festivals make a lot of sense to me, obviously. Books and publishing, I want to continue to do that. But I'm at that point of, things are changing, and I'm sort of thinking about what that's going to mean. I mean, luckily, I stay really busy. I mean, I get a lot of inquiries from people. I'm at the point where I can pick and choose still. I hope that continues to be the case. But ultimately, I take really seriously the responsibility of trying to put out into the world, or help to put out into the world, something that, people have taken their time and energy to write and create, and to that's a for me, that's a really heavy responsibility. And so I hope to continue to keep doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Yeah, I want to thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, Sam, for being such a nice person to work with and get me ready. And for those of us, and like everyone in the world who's so busy, it's nice when you find that people respect your time and make the process of engaging with you an easy one. So thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Great.
This is great.
Thank you. So, wish you the best.
Thank you. And to you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thanks to our producer, Sam Lemon, for another awesome episode. Please go check out Red Pencil Publicity and Marketing and look for the next Uncharted Berkeley Festival of Ideas scheduled for next October. You can find them over at berkeleyideas.com. Thank you again to my guest, Helena, for being on the podcast. I love today's conversation. We could have easily gone a lot longer, and we will have to have you back on for another episode. For the listener, we all have ideas and viewpoints that we feel to be true. We believe them down to the core. I mean, we only know what we experience, right? I encourage everyone to take a step back and expand your mind by listening to opposing views. Try to understand the other person's why. Try to understand their viewpoint from their perspective, their experience. I think if we all did that at least once a day, it would make a difference in today's world. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Please like, comment, share, and do not forget to subscribe. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.